A very warm welcome to everyone. Good morning. My name is Jayant Mahadevan. I work as Assistant Professor of Psychiatry here at the Center for Addiction Medicine at NIMHANS. And on behalf of all of us, we would like to welcome you all to this 3-day event. It is a collaborative workshop between NIMHANS Bangalore, IIT Kharagpur, and LGB RIMH Tejpur. With us here at NIMHANS, we have Professor Pratima Murthy. She's also the first speaker of the day. We have Professor Animesh from IIT Kharagpur, Dr. Sadhi Mukherjee from LGB RIMH, and many other team members from all the three teams. In the spirit of nothing about us without us, we also have many persons with lived experience of mental illness attending these sessions. Here at NIMHANS, online as well as at LGB RIMH Tejpur. Therefore, to protect the confidentiality of participants, we will not have a round of introductions. However, please do feel free to introduce yourself whenever you are going to ask a question or interact with panelists. Before starting the proceedings, I would just like to remind all of us here and online about some of the housekeeping rules. We are a heterogeneous group here. There are more than 300 participants who have registered and shown interest for this workshop. These include mental health professionals, computer science experts, as well as persons with lived experience. Online participants can ask questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom app. So this is the way to be able to reach out and discuss your questions or doubts. At the end of each talk and at the end of the panel discussion, we will be collating all of these questions and dividing them into themes and discuss them. A request to everyone, please be respectful when you are asking questions in this forum. Throughout the day, Mr. Manoj and Ms. Meghna will be here to help us with tech support. So if you have any problems, please put it in the Q&A, even related to any technical aspects, and they will respond. Right? I think Dr. Prakriti, who is here, is going to be collating the questions in the Q&A, and she will be asking these questions at the end of each session. With that, I hope that this will be 3 very, very exciting days of multidisciplinary learning. As you guys would have seen in the schedule, each day has its own theme. And the theme for today is data privacy, security, governance, and sovereignty. With that and without any further ado, I would like to now invite Professor Pratima Murthy to deliver her talk. The talk is titled Mind, Machine, and a Billion Voices, Charting a Responsible Course for AI in Indian Mental Health Care. Professor Pratima Murthy is Senior Professor of Psychiatry and she is Director of NIMHANS. She brings a dual expertise. She's both an extremely senior and experienced clinician, as well as a distinguished policymaker. I now invite Professor Pratima to deliver her talk.
Thank you very much, Jay. This is a very exciting 3-day program to be in. And I'm really looking forward to the kind of discussions that are there. Probably one of the first and unique ones in the area of AI and mental health. That makes it even more exciting. Of course, I'm just going to start off with 2 little caveats. I have to go for another program at 10 o'clock. I have a sharp end at 10 o'clock. So I'll probably finish the presentation. And I'm sure there will be questions going forward. Maybe we can collate the questions and answer them appropriately during the other sessions. So let me start off by this. The topic itself is very intriguing. And Lekhansh has come up with this particular title for this presentation. So, I mean, when you talk about mind and machines, I mean, the first thing that comes to me as a psychiatrist is possibly this whole business of cognito ergo sum, the idea that the mind, is the mind something very distinct from the brain? What is the mind? Can whatever happens in the mind simply be converted in terms of neural pathways and therefore be subjective to machine learning and the various kinds of wonders that AI can do? And I think understanding that itself is an intriguing idea. Yesterday, we had a philosopher who was here at NIMHANS at the Center of Consciousness, and we were discussing just this. How do neural messages get converted into thoughts and language. And I think that's something that we haven't really been able to completely understand. And therefore, going forward, I think there are huge opportunities to try and understand this interface between mind, machine. And of course, how does it matter to a billion more voices in our country when we talk about the landscape of mental health care? So what I'll try and do in the next few minutes is give you an idea about the landscape of mental health care, what might be the challenges in terms of the application of AI, and indeed what might be the huge opportunities for using AI. And that might set the tone for the rest of the discussions going forward. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? So going forward, let's look and see what has happened in the landscape of mental health in the last few decades. All of you, of course, I'm sure know about NIMHANS. I'd just like to mention that NIMHANS turned 50 years old as NIMHANS, but well before that, in 1954, the first postgraduate center in mental health actually was started at the very site that NIMHANS is. So in that sense, we have a very long tradition of mental health care. And in the last 50 years, combined with neurological and neurosurgical care. And of course, one understands the context of NIMHANS also in the context of the growth of mental health care in the country. After NIMHANS started, several of the institutions in the country have also started postgraduate courses. And of course, the origins of the National Mental Health Program also began in Bellary in Karnataka. So in that sense, there is a long history and tradition of being involved, engaged in mental health services. We seem to be having a bit of a glitch with...
Yes. Right at the beginning.
It just tells you how primitive we still
just
are.
in their presence. No, they are equally bad with all this.
Yeah, so
I have. You'll have to share this project head screen up.
So let me first check with a show of hands whether all of you are able to see the screen. Can somebody put up their hand if they can at least see the screen? Yeah, that's good. But the slides are not moving, so let's try and sort it out.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there it goes. So I think always it's good to have the glitches right in the beginning and sort them out. But going forward, it goes on carefully. So as I mentioned, it was in the 1980s that India launched the National Mental Health Program. And you must understand that right in the beginning, the whole idea was to integrate mental health care with general health care. And we're slowly inching towards trying to do that. But of course, to be able to do that, you need to have a good idea of what mental health care needs to look like. And that is something that we've been strengthening over time with the district mental health program, the decentralized mental health program, starting in the 1990s. And in NIMHANS, we also initiated the first national mental health survey in 2015, 2016, before COVID. And now we're again in the process of doing the second mental health survey, which will now give us state-wise understanding of the problem of mental health and the system response to mental health in the country. And we also perhaps have one of the best laws in our country in terms of the Mental Health Care Act, which was developed in 2017. We know that India has been a signatory to the UNCRPD, which is the rights of persons with disabilities. And therefore, sometimes, especially in terms of admissions and so on, we need to have some things that actually protect patients and allow their right to admission. And within admission, what kind of rights we need to ensure that is protected also is covered by the Mental Health Care Act. And we have something called the National Mental Health Policy. In addition to the National Health Policy, which gives primacy to mental health, we also have a National Mental Health Policy, which looks at decentralizing mental health care to the districts. Why I'm emphasizing this and why is this important in the context of AI is that we therefore, the moment healthcare is decentralized, we are talking of a huge diversity of people seeking mental health services. So the inputs that come in for mental health services are also completely varied in terms of language, in terms of your socio-cultural backgrounds, in terms of understanding about the concept of mental health and disease. And all of these become very, very important in the topic that we're discussing. In COVID, a psychosocial helpline was started, and this became quite popular. And subsequently, this psychosocial helpline, kind of evolved into what is called the Telemanas 14416, and people anywhere in the country can call a Telemanas cell. There'll be a trained counselor who speaks to them in their own language. It's there in more than 20 languages, and that again illustrates the diversity that we need to have. Similarly, there is a Kiran helpline, which is intended for people with other kinds of problems. There are dedicated helplines for people with addiction-related problems. There were dedicated helplines for farmers who are going through difficulties. And the idea now is to integrate all of these into a mental health line through the Telemanas. And that is constantly expanding. Last year, we had the development of an app. And, it's been very encouraging how many people have actually used the app. Now the app has been expanded into multiple languages. There is an enablement of a video consultation so that people can actually meet a mental health care professional. So within Telemanas itself, we are seeing a lot of innovation based on technology. And the whole idea of Telemanas itself is a technology-based platform. And therefore, we are seeing more and more nuanced improvements in the whole idea of Telemanas. And that becomes very exciting. The idea that with connectivity that we have in our country, with so many people using telephony as well as smartphones, the opportunities that exist in terms of being able to provide mental health care are huge. And we know that for mental health care, it's possibly even more easier than in other medical conditions to be able to use technology meaningfully and do more virtual consultations. So we'll be looking at how technology is going to be an enabler in doing that. Next slide, please. So in the previous slide, yeah. So I mentioned the National Mental Health Survey that was conducted in 2015, 2016. This was conducted in 12 states. And therefore, it's a representative sample in all of these states. And we generally found that about 1 in 10 persons, about 11% of people have a mental disorder in their lifetime. And when you look at an illustrative example of depression, for example, the prevalence was about 3%. And an important thing is that it was more represented from people in small towns, people who are educated, less educated, and poorer. And this is something that has been globally shown, that mental health problems usually are overrepresented in vulnerable populations like these. And the fact that suicide rates in India, for example, are higher among females than among males. Globally, you will see that the suicide rates are relatively higher among young males, but in India, there is a difference. But it's also interesting to see that with increased education and higher levels of education, the trends possibly follow the global trends. Therefore, when you look at mental health issues, you need to look at gender, you need to look at age, socio-cultural backgrounds, urbanicity, their social status. This is possibly true of other physical disorders as well, but certainly more amplified as far as mental disorders are concerned. When we go to the next slide, we also find that the economic survey raised something called the mental health quotient. Mental health quotient has been talked about both in individual sense as well as in a more larger country level sense. And the idea is that you look at the distribution of people who are in extremely distressful situations or feel very distressed to people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, who are thriving either as individuals or as a populace. And therefore, to improve this mental health quotient, one needs to see what can be the role of technology. The mental health and well-being is kind of covered by an entire range of various kinds of things. It might be the concept of self, which is social. It might be the cognition and the way we think. And that might be core cognitions or might be more complex cognitions. It's about drive and motivation that people have to achieve things. it's also about adaptability and resilience and coping, particularly in the, in the face of stress. And that's something that all of us face. How are we as a population or as individuals able to face that stress? Understanding one's outlook, as well as understanding the mind-body connection. And all of these components seem to contribute very closely to mental well-being. And therefore, it's important to understand how can you, along this spectrum, move people from a very distressed end of the spectrum to a thriving end of the spectrum. You can see in the bottom graph on your slides that between distress and thriving, there are several other states. People might be struggling, people might be able to manage what they're doing, or they might be doing well, but finally it is about thriving and doing well. And perhaps that's the shift that we need to look at. And we know that the 21st century has been regarded perhaps as a century of great stress, particularly in young people, Gen Z, Gen A now, I think it's called. And therefore, to really see how we can make young people develop an idea that they can thrive is something of a challenge. And again, how do we use technology, which is such a great enabler, to be able to do that is yet another challenge ahead of us. Next slide, please. So, when you look at emails, you'll find that there's a lot of new words that have crept into emails. Words like robust, strategic, leveraging, holistic, pivoting, transformative, and so on. And we certainly weren't using these words before. Those of us who are conversant in English, now a lot of what we write actually originally seems to be attributed now to ChatGPT. So even our originality somewhere is usurped by believing that it's it's part of ChatGPT. And certainly, I think what has happened in India is that we've become global leaders even in ChatGPT usage. So especially this becomes a huge problem, particularly among student dissertations, when one is not just looking for plagiarism in its conventional sense, but also to see how much of ChatGPT usage has occurred. And therefore, it appears that since we have captured such a large part of the active usage of ChatGPT, AI-powered tools consequently become something that is very attractive for use in the Indian population. And going forward on this, let's look at the fact that, again, we are the second largest market for Anthropic, and I believe they want to start their, I don't know if they've already done so. They've already started their functioning from India, have started a center in India, again, to look at, highlighting the fact that technology has become very, very popular in our country. Next slide, please. So this is again a very startling thing. I mean, I think all of us would think that AI is more used for businesses, for aiding technological kind of services and so on. But when you actually look at the main reasons globally, and this was as recent as April this year, where Harvard Business Review actually saw who were the users of AI. And when you see the most frequent use of AI, it's people who use generative AI for therapy, for companionship, for organizing their life, and for finding purpose in life. Let's just pause for a minute and think about this. So it appears that either we're in business, in one way of looking at it, which is, the fact that people are looking at how to manage their minds, how to manage a social connection, a connectiveness, or we might say we might be out of business if AI is going to be doing all of this. So I think this is a very interesting stage of life that we're all in. But the fact that AI is certainly being used for a whole lot of purposes of therapy and so on. But equally, there is also the growing concern of, there have been reports, for example, of how AI writes suicidal notes and how pushes people to suicide, how AI can actually hallucinate and, kind of give you incorrect information. And then how does a person use that information becomes something that we all need to think about. In fact, initially, there were cautions that were raised, which said For example, in the United States, where people were told that AI should stay out of therapy because robos lack feelings. But actually, there is equally some, literature which suggests that there can be high rates of empathy that AI related therapies can produce. However, the fact is that we need to still look into it to see what safety, privacy, and ethical concern they might be. And therefore, the typical AI as a boon and AI as a bane is something, and I think that this is not only with AI, this has happened with several kinds of interventions in the past. And it's very, very exciting in the beginning. And then, I wish it was the way of saying, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? This is the other way. That's if spring comes, winter follows. And therefore, all the problems that might occur along with the potential of this new technology needs to be examined. And of course, when you come to our country, I think the points that I made earlier, which is the cultural context, the language, and the accessibility also become important considerations when we discuss the application of AI in psychiatry. Next slide, please. So I did mention about formulation, about culture. And we do know that whatever context we understand psychiatric disorders and their backgrounds, in fact, even our diagnostic approaches do have a cultural context to the way they are formulated. And of course, one severe, one end of the spectrum is our culture-bound syndromes. For example, certain things that occur only in specific cultures and don't occur in other cultures. But that's one extreme. But even in the context of general psychiatric conditions, we do see that our definitions are guided by the cultural context. A typical example is the definition of a delusion. Delusion is of fixed, firm, false beliefs. But it is only when they're out of keeping with the person's cultural context that you consider them as delusions. And therefore, this is way back in the 1970s when Hamilton wrote Fisher's Psychopathology. But even now, we use the same kind of context to be able to determine psychopathology in psychiatry. We also know traditionally that the outcome for schizophrenia has been better in developing countries than in Western countries. And a lot of that is based in the socio-cultural matrix of where these disorders develop. And therefore, the most important thing is that contexts are very critical. We talk about it in the context of LMICs, but equally, I think in other countries as well, cultural contexts do determine the manifestation of psychopathology, the interpretation of psychopathology, and the response to psychopathology. Next slide, please. This is another very, very interesting fact that we use certain German terminologies. All of us who are familiar with catatonia know that Mitmachen, Mitgehen, Gegenhalten are terms that we use to describe phenomena in conditions like catatonia. And therefore, when we do a proper psychopathological examination of thought, perception, language, as well as responses to instructions, we use many of these words. And again, we have borrowed terminologies from German in this case to describe certain phenomenology. One might argue that some of these are culture-free in the way they are determined because they are definitions which you apply. But the fact that, you borrow from another culture to be able to use this talks about how we use, meanings differently in different contexts. Next slide, please. So within the country, I mentioned that we have, is it 24 primary languages or 20?
Scheduled.
In the 8th schedule of the Constitution, there are already demands for 30 more languages to be included. And the fact that when you look at the dialects, we run into thousands of dialects. And one of the things that is considered important in psychiatry is communication, because finally, everything you determine in psychiatry is based on what people say and the way their psychopathology is reflected in what they say. So language is very, very critical to psychiatry. And there are all these kind of differences in language and dialects, which finally influence the understanding and the interpretation of psychopathology. And therefore, this also becomes very critical to the use of generative AI going forward. Next slide, please. So what have I said in the last few minutes? I think it's very important to understand that certainly mental health is being, given priority at the national level. Just recently, we had the World Mental Health Day observed on the 10th of October. And on that, we now have even a mental health ambassador, in addition to all the other kind of activities that are happening. Technology is certainly something that is likely to be extremely useful. And we saw, even if, irrespective of what we think, there is already a very wide embrace of technology in terms of service delivery. I've given you examples of how we're using it already in Telemanas. I haven't talked about some of the other apps that have been developed at NIMHANS, for example, PushD for depression. We've been using apps for addiction. So there are several examples of some of these apps that are used. And of course, when you talk about what you need to understand the application of AI in, the cultural background, the language become two very, very important aspects for when you look at AI solutions, both in terms of the linguistic backgrounds and, of course, the risks and benefits, the ethics vis-a-vis the kind of problems that can occur. But I think the first step is really to start having discussions, actually having the technical community and the therapeutic community working together. So just to conclude, I'm just going to say a few words in Kannada for just to kind of make it more inclusive in terms of language. So ಇವತ್ತು ನಾವು ಏನ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಆರ್ಟಿಫಿಷಿಯಲ್ ಇಂಟೆಲಿಜೆನ್ಸ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಹಂತದಲ್ಲೂ ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ChatGPT ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ರೆಗ್ಯುಲರ್ ಇಮೇಲ್ ಕಾರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಸಹ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು AI ಫರ್ಮ್ಸ್ ಅವ್ರ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಈಗ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು AI ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ವಿಶ್ವದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲಾ ಕಡೆ ಬರೀ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಿಸ್ನೆಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಈ ಥೆರಪಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ, ಟ್ರೀಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಶನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ, ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಕನೆಕ್ಟೆಡ್ನೆಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಹ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು AI ಯೂಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ 50 ವರ್ಷ 70 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ನಮ್ಮ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ, ಅದು ಸಹ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಇನ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಏನು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಭಾಷೆಯ ಮೂಲಕ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು, ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಯಾವ ತರ ಇದೆ ಅದು ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಿಂಪ್ಟಮ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಡಿಫೈನ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ AI ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಈ ತರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಲಿಂಗ್ವಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ವೇರಿಯೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಲ್ಚರಲ್ ಕಾಂಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಕೂಡ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕು. AI ಯಾವ ಹೊಸ ಒಂದು ರೆವಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಬಂದ್ರೆ ಸಹ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಒಂದು ಆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಅದರ ತೊಂದರೆಗಳು ಸಹ ಇದೆ. ಈಗ ನಾವು ವೇರ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಹನಿಮೂನ್ ಫೇಸ್ ಆಫ್ AI ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ವಿ ಆರ್ ಲುಕಿಂಗ್ ಅಟ್ ಆಲ್ ದಿ ಎಕ್ಸೈಟಿಂಗ್ ಪಾಸಿಬಿಲಿಟಿ ದಟ್ AI ಆಫರ್ಸ್, ಬಟ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಸೇಮ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಅದರ ನೆಗೆಟಿವ್ ಪರಿಣಾಮಗಳೇನಿರಬಹುದು ಫ್ರಮ್ ಎನ್ ಎಥಿಕಲ್ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್, ಫ್ರಮ್ ಅ ಕಾನ್ಫಿಡೆನ್ಶಿಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಪರ್ಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟಿವ್, ಅದು ಸಹ ನೋಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಈ 3 ದಿವಸದ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಹಮ್ಮಿಕೊಂಡಿರೋದು ಬಹಳ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ವಿಷಯ. There's so many things that are going to be discussed going forward, and I'm sure we're going to emerge richer. I learned several things today. It was very useful in order to make the presentation, to read up a little bit about many things, and I'm sure going forward there'll be very exciting things ahead. I wanted to specifically also welcome Professor Animesh Mukherjee, who's here with us today. He's from IIT Kharagpur, and he has been working with Lekangsh and the rest of the team to actually try and see how some of these applications can be used in our clinical practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Pratima. I think your talk has really set the stage for this event. Thank you for providing an overview, one of course, the landscape of mental health care in India, both from a clinical and policy standpoint, and how AI would intersect with the same. I think there is a compelling and indisputable case for the importance of understanding cultural and language contexts when we try to understand mental phenomena. I think we will, as you had suggested, we'll compile the questions together, and maybe we will, some of them will be discussed during the panel discussion and during the course of the next 3 days. And of course, if there are any specific queries, we will